Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has been a distinguished diplomat and academic, philosopher, writer. He was India's High Commissioner to Australia, permanent representative of the United Nations, ambassador to several countries in the Middle East. He was Vice-Chancellor of the Aligarh Muslim University, a member of the National Security Advisory Board, and was recently appointed as chairperson of the National Minorities Commission. I'm delighted to welcome Mohammad Hamid Ansari, sir.
Thank you.
Tell us that you had the National Minorities Commission, and give us a sense of the sort of the issues that the minority majority struggle debate, in a sense, has been grappling with, in not just in India, but in many countries, in many societies. Very often when we look at issues of minorities and majority, the relationship in everyday conversation, it has to do with a riot in Gujarat, significant though it is. It has to do with the issue of reservation of minorities and what have you. What are some of the underlying sources of conflict, and what is the potential for this relationship to enrich civil society and to enrich the community? So let's start with the enriching aspect. That's perhaps easier and more pleasant.
Well, two things. One, there are no homogeneous societies. All societies are diverse societies, and the nature of diversity varies from society to society. It may be linguistic, it may be religious, it may be ethnic or racial, or it may be a mix of all these. It's not an Indian phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. Interestingly enough, this morning I had a group of European diplomats come to talk to me about comparing notes on the European experience with managing minorities and the Indian experience. Now, what is a minority, what is not a minority can be a philosophical debate, but essentially UN's working definition is a non-dominant section of society, which also happens to be smaller in number, and therefore faces X number of problems on account of that situational position. The fact that you have this diversity in India, and India is perhaps absolutely unique in the extent of its diversity. When I was abroad and I wanted to explain to an audience the diversity of India, I will show them an Indian currency note of 50
and the many languages,
and the language
yes,
is there.
yes.
Now you look at a dollar note, it's one language, sterling one language. In the Middle East, the languages would be two.
Do you feel that in India, that we have suffered somewhat because of this notion of unity and diversity, and perhaps we should have looked at celebrating diversity than trying to look at some unifying strand in what is obviously diverse, and we should just celebrate diversity?
Well, this of course is a very old debate in India and continues to this day on the political spectrum as well as outside it. But I think the most relevant thing was said by the late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. There was a president or prime minister from a European country visiting India, and he wanted to pay a tribute to India. So he said, Prime Minister, we have great respect for your country. India is a melting pot of cultures. And she checked him. She said, I'm afraid I don't agree. India is not a melting pot. India is a salad bowl. This is the expression she used. A salad bowl in which you have all the ingredients. Each ingredient retains its identity, and yet put together it makes a delicious dish. Now, of course, there can always be a question, what is the salad oil you use? And my answer to that would be the Indianness, which is, Sunil Khilnani wrote that very fine book, The Idea of India. So, if you define Indianness in a comprehensive sense, then you take it all in.
Do you dare attempt a brief articulation of what Indianness might mean?
Have have to, you have
Don't
to
tell me
feel,
the whole book. I know the
you
whole
have to
book.
feel Indianness rather than to define
about
it.
it. Uh-huh.
I think the an amorphous definition is better than a precise definition, because the moment you begin to narrow the circle, you begin to leave out things. If the circle is, I think there are two things. What does it mean to be plural? Plural means that I have different identities. I'm a member of a writers club, I may be a member of a social club, I may be a member of a cricket club, I belong to a particular part of the country, I belong to a specific country in the world. Now, each one of these identities are important to me as an individual. And if I live in a society which celebrates diversity, then that society will be open enough to accept all these identities. Leave it to me, the individual, to ultimately do his own prioritization.
But you know, there seems to be a kind of schizophrenia that at the one level, sort of, you know, the philosophical level, at the level of rhetoric, and in some significant ways too, along that, in significant tangible ways, but the most popular articulated experience of people is that that you know, the minority majority issue is a source of great tension, is a source of conflict, even if it is because, you know, it is in the nature of news that, you know, conflict is what creates news and harmony doesn't. But you know, so the newspaper headlines, the discourse, and elections, and political exchanges, it is always this dimension of conflict. What are the sources of conflict? Just pursuit of power, of vested interest groups? You know, you're heading the National Minorities Commission. Are there real fundamental issues that go beyond governments and laws, in terms of the engaging between the majority community and the minority community, also recognizing that, you know, in states like Punjab, you know, the majority community is not really a majority community there anymore. It's such a complex matrix. But what are some of the underlying strands, you think, of conflict?
I think first and foremost, on a theoretical plane or a philosophical plane, the idea of otherness is what creates the difficulty. Now, if you identify or if you have a concept of otherness, then you have to follow up and see whether you accept or reject the otherness. In the specific Indian context, why did the Minorities Commission, it's in the plural, not a minority commission, it came into existence because, notwithstanding the framework of the Constitution and of the laws specifically guaranteeing minority rights, whether they are linguistic rights or religious rights, there was a perception, and this goes back to 1978 when the commission first came into existence. That was the first Janata government. There was the perception that a sense of confidence is lacking for acts of omission or commission that may have been committed consciously or otherwise. That is why you brought this body into existence, which in 1992 became a statutory body with a sharply defined charter of duties.
Yeah, it even sort of you know, cautions the judiciary to take you on. I mean, you have enormous power.
Yes, yes.
And
well, yes, there is a good deal of potency. It has to be exercised judiciously, but it has to be exercised. It's not always been exercised, but it has to be exercised, and the purpose of the legislation on the subject is very specific. One, to evaluate the progress in the development of minorities. In other words, each one of these words carries a specific meaning. You do need an exercise in evaluation. You do need to monitor progress, and monitor progress in relation to minorities within the wider national framework. Secondly, to monitor the implementation of the constitutional and legal safeguards. And thirdly, to address specific grievances that come to you, which are grievances relating to the complainant's identity as belonging to a religious minority, and for that purpose the Commission has the powers of a civil court to examine documents, summon witnesses, and so on and so forth.
You're watching a conversation with the chairperson of the National Commission for Minorities, Mohammad Hamid Ansari sahab. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away.
जो यूनबुक दक्षिण कोरिया का चैंपियन साइकिल रेसर जो यूनबुक का सिर्फ एक ही भरोसा राल्को टायर
I trust only Lyco tires for my bike.
राल्को टायर चैंपियन की पहली पसंद
Welcome back to a continuing conversation with the chairperson of the National Commission for Minorities. You were talking about otherness and you were talking about the debate, and this has been the universal debate in a sense on commissions of minorities, of initiatives that look at one group as opposed to the other or alongside the other. Is that do sort of acts such as this in fact heighten the sense of otherness? That in a discourse, when whether you're looking at reservations, whether it's based on caste or it's based on religion, an argument often is that this is emphasizing the otherness, it's not using economic criteria. There's a whole sort of debate and discussion about that. What is your view? What is a legitimate basis for, of course, supporting and helping those that have been disenfranchised, who lack privilege, who lack opportunity, exploitation? But in the process of doing that, you emphasize the very principle that you're seeking to, in a sense, counter.
Well, look at it this way. One, this is not an Indian question only. All societies have diversities. Every family has a diversity. You may have 3 children. The academic progress of all 3 children may not be the same. The health condition of all 3 may not be the same. And therefore, it becomes the responsibility of the father and the mother and the family that if there is a weaker segment, then you help it come up, catch up.
But the difference is, in a sense, that when you use the melting pot theory or the melting pot ideals in the United States, it's really looking to the Americanization or whatever that is of everybody who comes in and it becomes a melting pot. Or even in the United Kingdom, sort of issues are now being raised that there must be an English test, there must be awareness of aspects of English history, and a whole range of issues. We're looking more at the salad theory, where those elements are still maintained. So there is a distinction, and between.
That's precisely the point. The American experiment and the more recent European experience shows that the melting pot does not work, because you're trying to straitjacket. And they themselves are looking now at other experiences. They've been talking to various groups of Indians. How do you manage diversity? This is a question that is posed. How do you manage diversity? Now, obviously, diversity is something that has to be managed. It has to be a continuous exercise. But you have to be sufficiently open and don't introduce rigidities in situations which are essentially fluid. I think that is the operative principle. When you come to specifics, whether the word reservation has acquired a certain connotation in Indian political lexicon. People are all right when it comes to train reservations, hotel reservations and all, but not in this field. But I would use a different term. Two things: the principle of equality, the principle of justice, the principle of empowerment. I think if you take these three, principle of equality, it's a core of the chapter on fundamental rights, right to equality. It's a one-line clause. All citizens shall be equal. Now, if you just accept and concede that, and then identify why are some people less equal than others, and there must be, of course, a reason for it. Discover the reason. Make sure that if that inequality exists, that you create conditions to bridge the gap.
You know, I don't want to get into a debate on, you know, the pros and cons of reservation. That's a much larger issue than the context of this program. But I was really interested in the position of the National Commission for Minorities and you as an individual. You know, you talked about managing diversity. What did you mean by managing diversity? You know, what are the elements that you use to manage diversity? Ultimately, you know, can legislation, can official bodies such as yours achieve social engineering? Can you begin to look at, you know, attitudes, responses, and emotions? You know, the machinations of local level politicians, the pursuit of power. In such a complex matrix, what are some of the key elements that you feel are crucial to managing diversity?
The exercise of management is essentially something that covers the whole society. It cannot possibly be done by this agency of the state or that agency of the state, or the state as a whole. I think this is a societal exercise, number one. It used to be said about the late Mr. Jagjeevan Ram that he not only knew each one of his constituents, but he also knew whose festival was falling when, and would appropriately send a gift. Now that's an excellent constituency man. Because our constituencies have become so big, most legislators at the national level have got somewhat removed. But ideally speaking, elected representatives of the people should be doing just that. That is where the exercise of continuous absorption of diversity and in the process managing it begins. And if you are doing it right at that level, at the local level, then you simply keep raising it up till you get to the state level and the national level. But it is a challenge. It is not an easy thing. There is no room in it for rigidities. And I think the great Indian experience, despite aberrations from time to time over the last 6 decades, is just that. That situations come up, you in a very ad hoc manner try to find solutions. Most of the time you get it right. Sometimes you don't get it right. Sometimes you know, you have to cry blue murder. That also has happened. But it is the societal response to it that is very important. I mean, you take the most horrendous thing that happens in recent times was Gujarat. But the Indian society, not just one segment of population, the Indian society revolted against it.
You know that this dovetails in everyday discourse very much with notions of national identity. And it used to come up in cricket matches initially that, you know, if there's someone, a Muslim playing watching a cricket match, you know, they have the allegiance of Pakistan. And of course, internationally that is now sort of getting so very diluted. So you have a Sikh, you know, spinner playing for England, and you have a Muslim who's an Indian cricket captain. But somewhere this still remains sort of a kind of dichotomous response that people feel, a kind of confusion that you know, what is Indianness, the brief thing we touched, and of course, you know, the BJP came in and said, well, you know, Indianness is sort of associated with Hindu, and if you're a Muslim you know, living in India, then you're a Hindu Muslim in some sort of unique kind of way. How do we begin to resolve issues of national identity with sort of diverse minorities?
Well, precisely that way. I mean, I had in a different context to quote an American statesman of another age recently. I said, he said, what is wrong in theory cannot be right in practice. You've got to get your conceptual framework right. this whole business of defining Indianness narrowly, in drawing a distinction between Indic religions and non-Indic religions, and so on and so forth. This is narrowing the circle. Why should you do it in a society that has always celebrated diversity? I mean, you take today's Western Europe. They are having this problem. No North African or Indian went to Western Europe on his own. They all went there or were taken there for an economic compulsion. Now a second generation has come up, a third generation has come up. They are there. They are part of that society, and yet they have an identity. If the society cannot accommodate that identity, it's a failure of that society. I think you're seeing it happen in Germany, you're seeing it happen in France, to a lesser extent in the British Isles, because the British are very eclectic about these matters. So they managed to find their way to a solution. I think the answer for India is very obvious. You cannot possibly, the sheer diversity from north to south, east to west is so enormous that we can be the model for the world. But if we take the wrong road and say a straitjacket, and therefore anything that doesn't fit in the straitjacket is something that is not Indian, then you're heading for trouble.
So we avoid our equivalent of, no scarves and no turbans and what have you. You're watching a conversation with Hamid Ansari Sahab, the chairperson of the National Commission for Minorities, and a distinguished diplomat and a former Vice-Chancellor at the Aligarh Muslim University. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away.
सत्ता, राजनीति और सामाजिक जीवन के विभिन्न पक्ष एक साथ आमने सामने।
उसके बाद क्या?
हमारा उद्देश्य है दावों प्रतिदावों को आपके सामने लाना ताकि सत्य आ सके सामने और जनता की सहभागिता लोकतंत्र में बढ़े।
रविवार रात 10 बजे सिर्फ डीडी न्यूज पर। आमने सामने के प्रायोजक इमामी फेयर एंड हैंडसम, बी फेयर एंड बी हैंडसम, नो मोर छुप छुप के।
Welcome back to a continuing conversation with Mohammad Ansari Sahab. We were talking about, I just sort of mentioned the Aligarh Muslim University, and there has been this discussion and debate not that long ago on the 50% reservations issues, and we touched on the issue of reservations. In a context like that, what is the value, the meaning, the relevance for a university that's called the Aligarh Muslim University? Do you think there is a basis for debate that should go beyond saying, well, obviously it's an Aligarh Muslim University and there should be 50% students there who are Muslim?
No, the moment you accept that it is a Muslim university, then the law as laid down by the Supreme Court in the St. Stephen's case and other cases automatically makes it so. What is at issue at the moment as a result of a High Court judgment is Aligarh Muslim University a Muslim university?
And it just happens to be called a Muslim
university,
but
now,
it isn't really one.
I think there is a principle of jurisprudence which comes in. There are two interpretations of it. Does the state create an identity or does the state recognize an identity? The law as it stands, there's an act of parliament for all universities and for Aligarh also. It was last amended in 1981, and the 81 amendment said very specifically, by the university is meant the institution of learning established by the Muslims of India, so on and so forth. I mean, an institution of their own choice. It should make it quite clear. But the learned judge took a different view. He said, established and all that is fine, but it is the act of parliament which creates it.
Beyond the technicality of it, would you believe that it's a good, useful, valuable thing for there to be an Aligarh Muslim University or a Jamia Millia or a Banaras Hindu University or what have you, that works to serving or perpetuating or working towards spreading the agendas, concerns, perceptions, culture of that particular community, and so holds 50% reservations, as opposed to, say, a secular university that has reservations for a minority. What for you, and not necessarily related to your own role as Vice-Chancellor there, what do you think is sort of an ideal mix, a matrix that would achieve the larger goals of the salad bowl?
You have multiple goals. One is that you can't disown history. Why did Banaras Hindu University come to be called Banaras Hindu University and Aligarh came to be called Aligarh Muslim University? Is something that happened in history. In fact, the Banaras came first, and that was in 1960.
Maybe we should just change those names
Yes, but nobody wants that. Neither of the two. The alumni of both don't want it. But the interesting thing is that the act of Banaras Hindu University was framed in 1916. Aligarh came 4 years later. It's a copy of the Banaras Hindu University Act, except for a minor amendment. It's hugely amusing. It defined the area of jurisdiction of the university, and the Banaras Act says a distance of 15 kilometers from the central temple. So in the case of the Aligarh University, they said 15 kilometers from the central mosque. For the rest, it's the same.
Okay.
The point is, history is there. You can't disown history. You live with it. You learn from it, you live with it. That's one side of it. The other is, if an institution has, for whatever reason, come to be identified as a place where a particular set of people go, let the institution insist on performance, insist on quality. Now, the trouble with our higher institutions of higher learning are all these. It's not that name. It doesn't matter what name, X, Y, Z. The question is, are you performing? Are you delivering goods of the quality that is required nationally at this particular time in India's history?
Let me sort of move on towards the conclusion of the program, and then ask you that as the and I'm sorry the program hasn't, and I've sort of been far too sort of engaged with the discussion minorities, and we haven't really touched on your many other interests. But sort of to, as the chairperson, National Commission of Minorities, your current identity, performance, you've used several buzzwords. What would be the measure of your own performance, personally, and of the National Commission for Minorities during your tenure? What yardstick would you use? What are sort of the 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100 specific things that you feel you would want to achieve, or interventions and initiatives beyond the reaction to the reactions to all the complaints and things that come in? What would be the proactive things that you seek?
Remarkable question. You want me to erect the gallows and then hang myself? Well, the answer is simple. I think there is a sharply defined charter of duties. Those duties have to be performed. They have to be performed to the fullest extent possible.
But each person who heads it brings his own agenda, his passion, where he's coming from, and there's this focus, this emphasis.
No, I don't bring an agenda, because I think I'm firmly of the view the agenda is the act of parliament. But there is a way of doing something efficiently, and there's a way of doing something less efficiently. I would opt for the former rather than the latter.
Well, it's a shame we didn't get to sort of discuss your career as a diplomat, because that's a very diplomatic answer. Well, we still have a few moments. Tell me that in terms of your personal agendas and striving through diplomacy, through academia, the National Security Advisory Board, National Minorities Commission, what personal aspirations do you have for yourself? What you seek as the purpose, the mission of your life and sort of in the unfolding present?
Well, I've had a pretty full life as a diplomat, and post-retirement, I think I have done something which I always wanted to do. In fact, before I got into the business of diplomacy, I wanted to be a university teacher. So I've, in a sense, gone back to academia And as a visiting professor, as a researcher in think tanks, I've managed to do some of the things that I wanted to do all the time, but in a more focused way in the last few years, and it has been very satisfying.
Would you say that your current incarnation and the kinds of things that you do, does it do you feel inhibited in some ways between the personal Hamid Ansari and the role that you're obliged to, well, obliged isn't a fair word, but you know, the functions that you officially perform?
I haven't come across it yet.
Thank you very much. This has been
Good
a
to
great
see you.
pleasure. Thank you.
See you.